Beating Neo: The World Ends With You is about more than just winning the Reaper's game. It's about understanding the true potential of yourself and your friends, and why it is we form attachments to the people and places around us. Its opening moments paint a familiar scene of Reaper's pins and anarchy on the streets of Shibuya. Protagonists and best friends Rindo and Fret are pulled into a game of life and after death, and are basically left to fend for themselves against the noise with little instruction from the Reapers in charge. The duo is quickly joined by Minamimoto, who returns from the first title, and newcomer Nagi. This is the first of many big changes from the DS original. This version of the Reaper's game uses teams rather than pairs, and you're no longer playing against the game itself, but rather the other teams, who are all vying for the top spot on the scoreboard at the end of the week. Win and they can leave the game for good. Lose and they get erased. Fall somewhere in between first and last place and you're doomed to play the game for another week. When I interviewed the leads behind Neo: The World Ends With You several weeks ago, they told me the game is named the way it is because it's a new story that doesn't rely on players' knowledge of events and characters from the first game. And that is true, for about half the narrative. Eventually, characters and story elements from the first title, as well as The World Ends With You Final Remix's A New Day scenario, leak into the plot. The story and all of the elements of this world are far easier to parse this time around with exposition that doesn't overload players too much at once. But those returning from any version of the first game will be better situated to better understand the actions and motivations for some of the late game turns of event. The developers definitely tried to capture the spirit of the original by tying story progression to character growth and gameplay. Rindo, Fret, and Nagi each have a unique power they can use to get a leg up in the game. Rindo can turn back time, Fret can make people remember something they forgot, and Nagi can dive into people's minds to fight the noise within. Repeated use of their power pushes forward their character arcs, but because there is very little gameplay input tied to these powers, it doesn't have the same impact as Neku Sakuraba trying to bond with his new teammate, while players try to understand the sudden change in button inputs for their partner character. Not only that, but I don't believe the writers for Neo make the most out of the world they've created. There are several story elements here that are underexplored, such as the relationship between Shibuya Reapers and Shinjuku Reapers who now control the city. Some questions I had received throwaway explanations, and there are a few crucial points of the plot that new players will just be asked to go along with. The story may not have everything I would have wanted, but what is here is quite good, and the narrative as a whole is boosted by some strong new characters. I have a feeling that Shoka, the raven-haired Reaper you meet at the beginning of the game, will end up as a fan favorite. And then there is the city of Shibuya, a character in itself that is just as lively, vibrant, and crucial to the story as any of the heroes who do battle with their little pin powers. In the first game, Shibuya had a striking but flat design, and the city felt like it was split into small, isolated locations rather than one interconnected metropolis. The addition of the third dimension to Neo's Shibuya loses some of the more esoteric designs, but creates one unified city that is far easier to navigate than before. Even if the more avant-garde style of The World Ends With You is gone, Neo's recreation of the city continues the original's bold approach to interpreting and expressing Shibuya's iconic and distinct districts. Using fixed camera angles, the developers have created a city that stretches and kneels to Rindo as he moves about the busy streets of the Buya. It's a magnificent effect, creating districts that can feel open and welcoming or overbearing and impressive. And smartly, it's not overused, otherwise walking through Shibuya might feel like you're in Who Framed Roger Rabbit's Toontown. The decision to keep control of the camera away from the player is not without its drawbacks, however. In combat, your view of the action of the screen can sometimes be obscured by numerous large enemies and extensive particle effects from your attacks. The camera AI does a decent enough job for most of the game, keeping players focused on the enemy of their choice with its sometimes reliable auto-targeting system. But in later chapters, I often struggled to see what was going on because of its positioning and the sheer mass of the creatures I was battling. Later chapters also see an increase in the amount of frame rate drops during combat. On the Switch, these drops were only for a moment no matter if I was playing in docked or handheld mode. However, depending on the timing of the drops, they did sometimes work against me in my efforts to dodge enemy attacks. A brief drop in the frame rate could completely throw off my timing, and dodging attacks is crucial in late game encounters where enemies dole out massive amounts of damage in a single blow. Thankfully, I was able to work my way through these troubles with smart gameplay and a clever combination of the pins I picked up during my adventure. Pins dictate which type of attack each member of your team can perform. You can assign a single pin to each character, and each pin carries with it a designated button input. Button mashing melee attacks will use either the X or Y buttons, while charging attacks and sustained attacks will be assigned to one of the 4 shoulder buttons. Experimenting with these pins, leveling them up, and evolving them into new, more powerful attacks is a real blast. The action RPG gameplay in Neo is electric, and some of the best I've experienced in years, but it can also be downright frustrating if you go into battle with a bad combination of pins. Each pin has a short reboot period after its power has been exhausted in battle, so the idea is to create a combination of pins that can always have you attacking. Doing that gets a bit more complicated the further you get into the game. Your team will grow, and with it, you may find yourself holding your controller differently than you're used to. Having attacks assigned to all 4 shoulder buttons forced me to bring my middle fingers into the action, where usually they rest on the back of my controller. It can feel unnatural, and unfortunately, that unnatural feeling makes Nioh almost unplayable for me in handheld mode. Don't get me wrong, this game looks outstanding on the small split screen. The colors and art direction absolutely pop on it, and I can just imagine how sleek it'll look on the OLED model. It's the Joy-Con that are the problem here, as the controllers are too slim for me to comfortably hold in a manner where I can tactfully use all 4 shoulder buttons at once. You can avoid this, of course, by choosing your pins carefully and developing attack strategies that don't rely on more than 2 shoulder buttons at the same time. You can also make sure you're doing as many side quests as you can during your adventure to expand your social network. As you help people throughout the game, you'll unlock new skills and abilities, including one that lets you equip 2 pins with the same input. You'll also unlock combo boosts that help you quickly increase your groove meter in battle. Building up your groove meter through coordinated hits gives you access to mashups and killer remix attacks. The game builds these up as if there's some sort of devastating strike against your opponent, but in practice, they can feel kind of wimpy and are undoubtedly the least visually stimulating aspect of the game. Disappointing as these attacks may be to look at, everything else in Nioh is a visual treat. The food art is on point, character fashion is ultra trendy, noise design both new and old shows a lot of imagination, and the few animated cutscenes are plenty sleek. Its lavish style extends to the soundtrack, which features new tracks and remixes from the first game. The music in Nioh is pure audio delight, though it can sometimes clash with the more dramatic story scenes. Sick beats just sound out of place when somebody is mourning the death of a friend. Nioh: The World Ends With You is a sequel worth waiting for. It brings together many of the best concepts from the DS original, but in a more approachable and accessible experience. It may lack the lightning-in-a-bottle genius of its predecessor, but the 40+ hours I spent exploring Shibuya showed me this world doesn't have to be complicated to be worthwhile. For more written reviews, previews, features, and news, be sure to check out Destructoid.com.